The morning air was cool and thin, carrying the smell of wet earth and pine. The little orphan girl woke up before the sun, as she always did. Her small wooden hut stood near the edge of the river, far from the main village. She had built it, with the help of the townsfolk after the fire that had taken her parents. Life had been quiet since then, lonely but peaceful in its own way. Every morning she would fetch water, tend to her small garden, and talk softly to the birds that perched on her fence. They were her only company most days. Though she missed her parents dearly, she had learned to smile again. She believed that kindness could fill the emptiness left behind by loss. The river, wide and silver under the morning sky, was both a friend and a challenge. It brought her water and fish, but it also separated her from the main path to the village. She had to use a narrow wooden plank as a bridge, balancing carefully with her bucket each day. The current was fast, and one wrong step could pull her away. Yet she never complained. She had grown brave, not because she wanted to be, but because she had no one else to lean on. That morning felt different. The forest seemed unusually quiet, as if holding its breath. She noticed it as soon as she stepped out with her bucket. Usually the sparrows chirped and the wind played in the trees. But today, there was only stillness. Even the river's rush sounded distant. She stopped halfway across the plank, glancing at the far bank. Then she saw her, a young girl standing by the trees on the other side. She looked about her age but was dressed differently, in handmade clothing decorated with simple beads and thread. Her dark hair was long and tied loosely behind her head. She leaned against a stick, one leg bent awkwardly, her face pale with effort. The orphan froze. She had never seen this girl before. For a moment they just stared at each other, the river flowing fast between them. Then the orphan raised her hand in a small wave. The stranger tried to return it but nearly lost her balance. That was when the orphan noticed her limp. Without thinking, she crossed the plank to the other side. The stranger's eyes widened in surprise, as if she didn't expect anyone to come closer. Up close, the orphan could see that the girl's ankle was badly swollen. "Are you hurt?" the orphan asked softly. The girl hesitated, then nodded. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "I slipped on the rocks. I can't cross back alone." The orphan looked at the river. The current was strong that morning. Even she, who crossed it daily, felt unsure. But she couldn't just leave the girl there. "Hold my hand," she said. "I'll help you." The girl's eyes flickered with both fear and trust. Slowly she reached out. Their hands met, small, cold, trembling. The orphan guided her toward the plank. The wood creaked under their weight, and for a second it seemed like it might give way. The limp girl's grip tightened, her breath quickening. "It's okay," whispered the orphan. "Just one step at a time." The plank swayed. Water splashed against their feet. The orphan went first, steadying herself, then helping the other girl step forward. The sound of the river grew louder, as if it wanted to test their courage. When they finally reached the middle, the plank shook hard, and the limping girl gasped. She nearly fell, but the orphan pulled her close. "Don't look down," she said gently. "Look at me instead." The limping girl did. Her dark eyes glistened with tears, not just from fear, but also from gratitude. Slowly, carefully, they made it to the other side. When they stepped onto the riverbank, both girls sat down, breathing hard, their hands still holding on to each other. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the orphan smiled shyly. "You're safe now." The limping girl nodded, looking at her with quiet wonder. "Why did you help me? You don't even know me." The orphan shrugged lightly. "Because you needed help." The answer was simple, but it touched something deep in the stranger's heart. She stared at the orphan as if she was trying to understand a kind of goodness she had rarely seen. They sat together for a while. The orphan offered the stranger a drink from her small wooden cup and tore a piece of bread from her morning meal to share. The other girl accepted it with trembling hands. "I'm from the woods," she said finally. "My people live on the other side of the hills. We don't come here often. The river is where our lands meet yours." The orphan nodded slowly. She had heard stories about the native people in the hills, stories told in whispers by the village adults. Some were kind, some were not. But sitting there beside this girl, she couldn't see anything to be afraid of. She saw only a tired, hurt child who needed care. "Do you have someone waiting for you?" the orphan asked. The girl looked down. "My brother was supposed to meet me, but he didn't come." The orphan thought for a moment. "You can rest at my house until he finds you." The girl looked uncertain. "I shouldn't. My people might worry if I'm gone." "Just until you can walk," the orphan insisted kindly. "It's not far." After a moment, the limping girl nodded. The orphan helped her stand and supported her as they walked the narrow path back to the hut. The sun had risen now, painting the river gold and the forest green. The birds had returned, filling the air with their songs again. When they reached the small hut, the orphan opened the door and helped her inside. The room was simple: a bed, made of straw, a small table, and a shelf with a few clay cups, yet it felt warm. The orphan placed a blanket over her new friend and brought her warm water to drink. "You can stay here tonight," she said softly. "Tomorrow we'll find your brother." The girl looked around, her eyes softening. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are very kind." The orphan smiled faintly. "My mother used to say we must help those who are alone. Maybe that's why we met today." That night, the two girls talked quietly by the fire. The orphan shared stories about her parents, how her father used to sing by the river and her mother made sweet bread on rainy days. The limping girl listened closely, her eyes reflecting the flicker of the flames. She shared little about herself, only that her tribe lived far away, and they kept to themselves because they didn't trust outsiders. Yet in that small hut, two worlds met without fear. The orphan didn't see her guest as different, and the limping girl didn't see her host as a stranger. For the first time in a long while, both felt less alone. When the fire began to fade, the orphan noticed the other girl had fallen asleep, her injured foot resting gently on a cloth. She smiled, covering her with another blanket. Then she sat by the window looking out at the moonlit river. It shimmered softly, peaceful again, as if the danger of the day had never happened. But something in the air felt strange. A faint drumbeat carried from afar, soft but steady. She tilted her head, listening. It came from across the hills. She didn't know what it meant, but she hoped it was nothing bad. Before long, sleep came to her too. The fire went out, and silence filled the little hut. When dawn approached, the sound of hooves echoed faintly in the distance. The forest birds scattered. The orphan stirred in her sleep, unaware of the shapes moving through the trees. 30 riders on horseback moved quietly along the riverbank, their faces calm but serious, their eyes sharp as they followed a trail. The leader raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He pointed toward the small hut near the water, smoke still rising from the chimney. Inside, the little orphan slept beside the girl she had rescued, both unaware that the kindness of one small act was about to bring something far greater to her door. The morning light crept slowly through the small cracks in the wooden hut. The orphan stirred, opening her eyes to the soft glow that filled the room. For a moment she forgot what had happened the day before. She only saw the warm sunlight falling across the floor and heard the gentle sound of the river outside. Then she turned her head and saw the girl still asleep beside the dying fire. Her injured foot was wrapped in cloth, and her face looked peaceful now, without the pain that had clouded it before. The orphan smiled quietly. She felt a strange warmth inside her chest, the kind that comes from knowing you did something right. She stood up carefully, not wanting to wake her guest, and stepped outside. The cool air brushed her face. Mist still floated over the river like a soft white blanket. Everything seemed calm, but something in the air felt slightly tense, like the forest was waiting for something to happen. She filled her bucket with water and looked across the river. That's when she noticed faint shapes in the distance, half hidden by trees. At first, she thought they were deer, but when one of them moved and the sunlight glinted off something metallic, she froze. They were men, many of them. Her heart started beating faster. She could see horses now, tall and strong, their breath steaming in the cool morning air. The riders sat straight, watching silently from across the river. Their faces were painted with marks she didn't understand. Some carried bows, others held spears. They weren't moving toward her yet, but she could feel their eyes on her. She took a step back, clutching her bucket tightly. Then she turned and ran inside. The limping girl was awake now, sitting up with confusion on her face. "What's wrong?" she asked in a low, startled voice. "There are men by the river," the orphan whispered, "on horses, a lot of them." The injured girl's eyes widened. She tried to stand but winced in pain. "You must not go outside," she said quickly. "Please, stay inside." The orphan didn't understand. "Who are they?" "My people," the girl said quietly, her voice trembling. "They must have come for me." The orphan's mouth went dry. Then it's good, isn't it? They're your family." The girl looked toward the door, her face filled with worry. "If they see me here, they will think you took me. They don't know you helped me." The orphan felt a chill. "But I didn't do anything wrong." "I know," the girl said, her voice shaking. "But they don't trust outsiders. They might be angry. You must let me talk to them first." Before the orphan could respond, there was a sound outside, hooves stomping on the ground, followed by the crack of branches. The air seemed to thicken with tension. The girl tried to get up again, leaning on the table, but her leg gave way. The orphan rushed to help her. "You can't walk like that," she said. "I have to," the girl insisted. "If they come here and find me inside, they'll think you kept me prisoner." The orphan shook her head helplessly. "But you're hurt." The girl gritted her teeth. "Then help me stand." The orphan slipped her arm around her and helped her limp to the doorway. When they opened it, they saw the riders had crossed the river. The water splashed around their horses' legs as they approached the small clearing. 30 of them, moving as one, their eyes fixed on the hut. The leader, a tall man with braided hair and sharp eyes, rode ahead. He stopped a few steps away, looking down at the two girls. For a moment, no one spoke. Only the river whispered behind them. The limping girl swallowed hard and took a step forward, wincing. "I am here," she said softly. "I am safe." The man's eyes flicked to her foot, then to the orphan standing beside her. His expression didn't change. "Who is this?" he asked in a deep voice. "She helped me," the girl said quickly. "I fell by the river. I could not walk. She brought me here." The man's gaze stayed on the orphan for a long, heavy moment. "You crossed the river?" he asked her. The orphan nodded slowly. "Yes, I saw she was hurt." There was no anger in his eyes, but there was caution, the kind that comes from years of protecting one's people. He dismounted from his horse and knelt to check the girl's ankle. His touch was careful, almost tender. "You are brave," he said to her in his language, words the orphan couldn't understand. Then he looked back at the girl's rescuer. "My daughter says you helped her," he said, "that you showed kindness." The orphan felt her chest tighten. "I just did what anyone would do." The man shook his head slowly. "Not everyone helps a stranger." He stood and turned to his people. They murmured among themselves, some glancing toward the orphan with unreadable expressions. A few dismounted, looking at her small hut, the modest garden, the patched roof. One of them, an older woman, walked up with calm eyes. She carried a small leather pouch and handed it to the leader. He opened it and drew out a bright red cloth, embroidered with simple white threads. He held it out to the orphan. "Take this," he said. "It means peace between you and us." The orphan hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted it. "Thank you," she said quietly. The limping girl smiled faintly. "Now they know you are a friend." The man nodded once. "We will take her home. She will heal among her people." The orphan's heart sank, though she didn't fully understand why. She had known the girl for only one night, yet it felt like she was losing a sister. "Will she be okay?" she asked softly. The man's gaze softened. "Yes, you have done more than enough." Two of the riders came forward to help the injured girl onto a horse. She looked back at the orphan, her eyes shining. "I'll come back," she said quietly. "I promise." The orphan smiled faintly. "Be careful." As the riders turned to leave, the leader paused one last time. "Kindness is never forgotten," he said, "even when people are far apart." Then they rode away, their silhouettes disappearing into the misty forest. The sound of their hooves faded slowly until only the river's murmur remained. The orphan stood alone by her door, the red cloth clutched tightly in her hand. She didn't move for a long time. The world felt silent again, but different, heavier somehow, like it had seen something sacred. She went back inside and sat by the fire. The warmth had faded, but her heart felt full. She looked at the place where the girl had slept and smiled sadly. She hoped the promise was true, that one day she would see her again. Days passed, then weeks. The orphan's life returned to its quiet rhythm. But she often found herself staring across the river, wondering how her friend was doing. She kept the red cloth folded carefully under her pillow. It reminded her that even in loneliness there were hearts connected by kindness. Sometimes she would hear drums echoing faintly across the hills, and she would stop whatever she was doing to listen. The sound always brought a strange peace, as if the rhythm carried a message meant just for her. Winter came early that year. The river froze at the edges, and frost covered the grass each morning. The orphan gathered firewood and stored food as best she could. Life was hard, but she never stopped believing in the goodness she had found that morning by the river. Then one evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, she saw smoke rising far in the distance, not from her chimney, but from the woods across the river. It wasn't the calm gray of a cooking fire. It was darker, thicker. She frowned, stepping out of her hut to look closer. The wind carried the faint smell of burning wood. She felt a tug of worry in her chest. Could it be her friend's village? The next day she saw figures moving near the forest again. Not the calm riders from before, but people running. She couldn't tell who they were or what had happened. All she knew was that something wasn't right. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the moonlight shimmer on the frozen river. She thought about the promise. "I'll come back." Then, just before dawn, she heard a sound outside. Hoofbeats again, soft but growing louder. Her heart leapt. She rushed to the door and opened it. A single horse stood there in the pale light. On its back sat the limping girl, her face pale, her hair tangled, her eyes full of tears. "They're coming," she whispered. "Please, you must hide." The orphan's breath caught in her throat. "Who's coming?" But before she could get an answer, another sound broke through the silence. Many hooves, pounding the frozen ground like thunder. The orphan looked toward the trees. Shadows were moving fast through the mist. This time there were more of them, too many to count. The girl slid off the horse, clutching her friend's arm. "They're looking for me," she said, her voice shaking. "And they won't stop." The orphan turned toward the forest, fear and confusion rising inside her. "What happened?" The girl's eyes filled with tears. "War," she said softly. "It has begun." And before the first light of dawn touched the river, the sound of warriors filled the valley once again. Only this time it was not a peaceful visit. The night had turned restless. The forest, usually calm under the moon, was alive with sounds of fear and movement. The orphan sat near the small fire, her eyes wide and sleepless. The limping girl sat beside her, clutching a cup of water with trembling hands. Both girls were silent, listening to the distant echoes that came from beyond the river. Outside, the air was heavy. Faint glows flickered far in the distance, fires burning on the horizon. The world that had once felt peaceful now seemed uncertain, almost angry. The orphan looked at her friend. "Tell me what happened," she whispered. The girl hesitated. Her voice was soft but carried the weight of sadness. "My people, they were attacked. A group came from another land, saying the river belonged to them. They burned our tents and took our horses. My father told everyone to run, He sent me away with 2 riders to find safety, but we were chased. I got separated. I thought I could find you." The orphan felt her heart tighten. "You came all this way hurt?" The girl nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I remembered your kindness. I had nowhere else to go." The orphan reached out and took her hand. "You did the right thing. You're safe here." For a moment, there was peace between them again. The kind that came not from quiet surroundings but from trust. Yet deep down, both of them knew that peace wouldn't last. Before dawn, they heard the sound again, horses moving closer through the mist. The orphan stood quickly, her hands shaking. The limping girl limped to the window and peered outside. "There are riders," she whispered. "Not my people." The orphan's breath caught. "Then who?" The girl shook her head. "I don't know, but they're not from my tribe. Their clothes are different." The orphan's heart pounded in her chest. She looked around the small hut, trying to think of what to do. There was nowhere to hide except the old storage pit behind the house. It was small, but deep enough for one person. "You hide there," she said quickly. The limping girl looked at her in surprise. "No. They might hurt you if they don't find me." "I'll tell them you're gone," the orphan said firmly. "Please, trust me." The limping girl wanted to argue, but the sound of hooves was already too close. She finally nodded and limped toward the back door. The orphan helped her into the pit and covered it with loose boards and a layer of straw. Then she stood alone inside the hut, her heart racing. Moments later, the door burst open. 3 men stepped inside. They wore rough coats and boots splattered with mud. Their faces were hard and tired, their eyes scanning every corner of the room. "What are you doing out here alone, kid?" one of them asked, his tone suspicious. The orphan swallowed hard. "I live here." The man looked around, frowning. "We saw smoke. Thought maybe someone was hiding." She shook her head quickly. "It's just me." Another man walked over to the bed, kicking at the blanket as if expecting someone to be hiding underneath. "You sure you're alone?" "Yes," the orphan said quietly, forcing her voice not to shake. The leader studied her face. "We're looking for a girl from the hills," he said. "She ran off after her people started trouble. You seen anyone cross the river lately?" The orphan's stomach twisted. She hesitated just long enough for him to notice. His eyes narrowed. "Well?" he pressed. She shook her head. "No one." He took a slow step closer. "You sure about that?" The orphan kept her eyes low. "I'm sure." The man stared at her for a long moment, then sighed and looked around again. "If you see her, you come find us. Understand? She's dangerous." The orphan didn't move. After a tense silence, the men turned and left. Their footsteps faded into the forest, and the sound of their horses soon followed. The orphan waited until she could no longer hear them before rushing to the back of the hut. She pulled away the boards and reached down. The limping girl climbed out, her face pale with fear. "They said you were dangerous," the orphan whispered. "Why would they say that?" The girl shook her head. "They don't know us. They're afraid of what they don't understand." The orphan nodded slowly. "We can't stay here. They'll come back." The limping girl looked at her with pleading eyes. "Then where can we go?" The orphan thought for a moment. "Across the valley. There's an old cabin by the edge of the woods. Hardly anyone goes there. We can hide until it's safe." The girl hesitated, then nodded. "I'll follow you." They packed what little food they had and a few pieces of bread, dried fish, and a jar of water. The orphan wrapped the red cloth around her arm and opened the door quietly. The forest was still misty, but light was starting to break through the trees. They moved quickly, staying close to the shadows. Every snap of a twig made them stop and listen. Every bird's cry made them glance behind. By midday, they reached the far side of the valley. The old cabin stood hidden among tall trees, half covered in ivy. The roof sagged a little, but it was sturdy enough. They slipped inside and shut the door. Inside, it smelled of wood and earth. The orphan cleared away some dust and made a small fire. For a few hours, they rested. The limping girl leaned against the wall, her eyes half closed. "You should sleep," the orphan whispered. "I can't," she said softly. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the fire. My home burning." The orphan sat beside her. "You'll build again. Maybe not the same home, but something new." The girl looked at her with tired eyes. "You talk like someone much older." The orphan smiled faintly. When you've been alone long enough, you learn to be old inside. They shared a quiet meal before night fell. The sound of the wind outside was gentle now, like a lullaby after a long day of fear. For the first time in days, the limping girl smiled. But just when they thought the night would pass peacefully, there was a sudden rustling outside, faint but clear. Both girls froze. The orphan grabbed the small knife she used for cooking and motioned for the other to stay silent. Slowly, she moved toward the window and peeked out. In the moonlight, she saw movement, shadows slipping through the trees. Her heart raced. "They found us," she whispered. The limping girl's face went pale. "What do we do?" The orphan thought fast. "There's a small stream behind the cabin. If we follow it, it will lead back to the river. We can lose them in the water." The girl nodded. "Let's go." They slipped out the back door, moving as quietly as they could. The cold air bit at their faces, but they didn't stop. They followed the faint sound of running water until they reached the stream. Behind them, voices echoed, distant shouts growing closer. The orphan helped her friend into the shallow water. It was freezing, but they kept moving. The current was strong enough to hide their footprints. The limping girl stumbled, but the orphan held her up. They followed the stream for what felt like hours until the forest opened into a wide clearing. There, under the moonlight, stood the river, wide, endless, and shining. The orphan looked across. On the other side, faint torches flickered, the same pattern she remembered from the limping girl's people. "They're there," she whispered. "Your people," the girl's eyes filled with tears. "But the river, it's too deep." The orphan looked at her, remembering the day they first met and how they crossed the same river together. She smiled faintly. "Then we'll do it again." Without waiting, she stepped into the cold water, holding out her hand. The limping girl hesitated only a second before taking it. The current pulled hard, but they moved together step by step, the moonlight guiding them. Halfway across, the water rose to their waists. The orphan felt her feet slipping, but she held on tighter. "Don't let go," she said. The girl's voice was weak. "I won't." When they finally reached the far side, both girls collapsed onto the muddy shore, shivering and breathless. From the trees ahead, torches moved toward them, not in anger, but in relief. Voices called out in the native tongue, full of emotion. The girl smiled faintly. "We made it," she whispered. The orphan looked back across the river. On the other side, she saw faint figures and the riders who had chased them, but they stopped at the water's edge. They didn't cross. The orphan exhaled slowly. For the first time in days, she felt safe. The girl's people reached them and lifted her gently, wrapping her in warm blankets. Their leader, the same man who had come before, looked at the orphan in silence for a long moment. "You brought her home again," he said quietly. The orphan nodded. Too tired to speak, he looked at his daughter, then back at the small girl who had risked everything. "You will never be forgotten," he said. "When the sun rises, you'll see what kindness has earned." The orphan didn't understand what he meant. She only knew that her heart felt full, not with fear, but with something bright and steady. The night faded into dawn. The mist rose from the river, and the first rays of light touched the trees. And as the orphan stood on that quiet shore, surrounded by people who had once been strangers, she realized that kindness had built her a home, not of wood or stone, but of hearts that remembered. The sun rose slowly over the valley, painting the river gold again. The mist lifted, and the air felt calm after many nights of fear. The orphan sat near a fire surrounded by people who had once been strangers, but now looked at her with quiet respect. She wrapped herself in a warm blanket one of the women had given her. Her clothes were still damp from crossing the river, but she didn't mind. She was safe. The limping girl lay on a bed of soft grass, her ankle carefully wrapped, her face relaxed for the first time in days. Every now and then she looked at the orphan and smiled, a small, tired smile that said more than words ever could. Men moved around the camp, rebuilding what had been lost. Children gathered near the fire, whispering and pointing at the orphan with curious eyes. She had never seen so many people together, working like a single heart. Even though she couldn't understand their language, she understood their kindness. The leader of the tribe, now the tall man with calm eyes, came toward her. He carried the same red cloth she had once been given, now folded neatly. "You have brought peace to our hearts again," he said in his steady voice. You crossed fire and river for someone not of your own blood. That is not forgotten. The orphan shook her head. I didn't do anything special, she said softly. She needed help. That's all, he smiled faintly. You see kindness as something small, but to those who have lost hope it is everything. He turned and gestured toward the forest beyond the river. Go home for now, rest. But when the dawn comes again, look to your porch. You will not be alone. The orphan didn't fully understand what he meant, but she nodded. The limping girl held her hand tightly. Don't go far, she whispered. We will come. The orphan promised she wouldn't. That afternoon, the tribe helped her cross the river safely. 2 men guided her through the current and made sure she reached her side of the bank unharmed. When she looked back, she saw the limping girl standing on the opposite side, waving with a weak smile. The orphan waved back, her eyes warm and wet. Then she turned and walked the path home. Her small hut stood quiet and unchanged, though it felt different now, as if it was waiting for her. She opened the door, lit a small fire, and sat down with a deep sigh. The silence no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. Days passed. The air grew still again, and the forest began to heal from the chaos. She went back to tending her garden, fetching water and cooking by the fire. But every time she looked across the river, she remembered. She remembered the fear, the kindness, the strength it took for 2 small girls to face a storm. On the 4th morning, something woke her before dawn. A faint sound, steady, rhythmic, familiar. Hoofbeats. She sat up quickly, her heart fluttering. The sound grew louder until it stopped just outside her door. The world was quiet except for the soft snort of horses. She rose and stepped outside. The early light painted the land in silver and gold. The mist hung low over the grass. And there they were, 30 riders standing in a line in front of her porch. They were the same warriors who had crossed the river before, but this time there was no tension, no fear. Their faces were calm. The leader sat in the center holding something in his hands. The orphan froze, not knowing what to say. The leader dismounted slowly and walked toward her. Behind him, the limping girl followed, walking carefully but without help this time. Her ankle had healed. She smiled as she came closer, her eyes shining like morning dew. The orphan ran forward and hugged her tightly. For a moment, the world felt right again. I told you I'd come back, the girl whispered. The orphan laughed softly, holding her friend close. I thought maybe you forgot. Never, she said. My father said we must return before the sun rose. The leader stepped forward, holding out a small wooden box carved with patterns of the forest. We came to bring you our thanks, he said. The orphan looked at the box, unsure whether to take it. You don't have to give me anything, he smiled. It is not payment. It is remembrance. She opened the box carefully. Inside, wrapped in red cloth, was a necklace made of river stones and small beads, simple but beautiful. Each stone was gathered by my people, he said. It will remind you that across the river, you have another family. The orphan's eyes filled with tears. She looked down at the necklace, tracing each stone with her fingers. I don't know what to say. Say nothing, the leader said gently. Just remember. He turned to his men and gave a quiet signal. 2 of the warriors stepped forward carrying bundles, food, cloth, and tools. They placed them by her door. The orphan was speechless. I don't need all this, she said softly. The limping girl smiled. We know. But sometimes kindness must be returned, not because it is owed, but because it feels right. The leader looked at the rising sun. When we first saw your smoke, we feared you. When you helped my daughter, you changed that. You showed that goodness does not need a name or a tribe. It only needs a heart. The orphan nodded slowly. You helped me too. I was alone before I met her. Now I'm not. He bowed his head slightly, then stepped back to his horse. The other warriors did the same. The limping girl stayed beside the orphan. I'll visit again, she said softly. When the river is calm and the air smells like spring. I'll be waiting, the orphan said. They hugged once more before the girl mounted her horse. The 30 riders turned together, their movements smooth and silent. As they began to ride away, the orphan stood on her porch, watching the scene unfold in the golden light of morning. The rhythm of hooves echoed through the valley, slow and steady, fading into the distance like a song carried by the wind. When the last rider disappeared beyond the trees, the orphan looked down at the red cloth still wrapped around her arm. She smiled. The porch was full of gifts, food, tools, blankets, and the carved box. But more than that, it was full of something she had never known before: belonging. She sat down on the steps, watching the sunlight dance on the river. The same river that had once divided two worlds now felt like a bridge. She thought about everything that had happened: the first meeting, the danger, the escape, the fear, and finally the peace. It felt almost like a dream, yet every part of it was real. From that day on, her life changed in quiet ways. The villagers who once thought of her as just an orphan began to notice her more. Some came to trade with her. Others came to listen to her stories. She told them not about war or loss, but about courage and kindness. About two girls who crossed a river and built something greater than walls or borders. Sometimes, she would still see smoke rising from across the hills, but it no longer made her afraid. She knew now that not every fire meant danger. Some fires were just people keeping the light alive. Seasons passed. The forest turned green, then gold, then white with snow. The river froze and thawed again. Through it all, the red cloth stayed by her window, fluttering gently in the wind like a quiet promise. On certain mornings, when the fog was thin, she would see shadows moving across the far bank. Horses, riders, and the faint echo of drums, and she would smile, knowing they were watching too. Years later, when people asked her about the morning 30 warriors stood at her porch, she would only smile and say, "They didn't come for war. They came because kindness remembers." And when she looked at the necklace made of river stones, she would trace each one softly and whisper to herself, "Across the river, I'm never alone." The river kept flowing, strong, endless, carrying stories from both sides. It carried laughter, memories, and the echo of two young voices that had once met in the middle, proving that even in a world divided by fear, one act of kindness could build a bridge that no storm could wash away. And every dawn, when the light touched her porch, it reminded her of that morning. The sound of hooves, the red cloth waving in the wind, and the quiet truth she had learned. Sometimes the smallest kindness changes everything.